6 years ago, I found myself sitting in a room with around 50 other people, listening to a survivor of the genocide in Darfur tell his story. Like many others around the world, I was moved to do something to help, and like many others, I had no idea what I was doing. I had never been to Sudan, and probably would not have been able to point it out on a map. A lot has changed in the last 6 years. I'm still not an expert on the goings-on of Sudan, so when we slipped across the border into the war-torn Nuba Mountains in June of 2012, we had one mission in mind: be a microphone for those who are being silenced. This is not my story, but the story of those who the world has wrongfully forgotten. But before you hear what they have to say, you need to meet the individuals responsible for some of the worst crimes committed in our world.
To visit Sudan, you have to want to go there badly. It's hard to get to, and it's dangerous once you get there.
Since the Omar al-Bashir regime seized power in 1989 during the North-South Civil War, it has overseen the deaths of over 2.5 million people, and to this very day is still killing.
It's estimated that during the North-South War, Northern troops took over 200,000 women and children as slaves.
The UN has
from the
estimated that over 2 million have perished in Sudan's southern provinces due to what the U.S.-Sudan Peace Act has called a genocide and war-related causes.
Government troops and their now infamous proxy militias would send out raiding parties from garrison towns into SPLA-held territory and target the civilian population to dry up support for the rebellion.
The effects of this were catastrophic. Forced starvation, mass displacement, killing and rape on a scale that made this war one of the deadliest conflicts of the century.
With the war winding down between North and South due to an international brokered peace agreement, rights groups are warning that a catastrophe is unfolding in Sudan's western Darfur region.
Bashir sent his forces and newly armed militias into Darfur to do more than just hunt down an armed rebellion. They entered communities with no rebel presences and massacred defenseless people, gang-raped women and girls, and forced millions to flee their homes.
U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell testifies in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in September of 2004, stating that the ongoing catastrophe in Darfur is indeed a genocide.
Sudanese President Bashir has made history by becoming the first head of state to have an arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for committing war crimes and possibly genocide in Darfur.
Human rights groups across South Sudan, the U.S., and Europe are warning that rising tensions between Sudan and the soon-to-be independent South is threatening to lead the largest conventional war on the planet.
Sudanese troops and militias have overrun the border province of Abyei in what is being called ethnic cleansing.
Ongoing fighting in Abyei town has forced UN peacekeepers to withdraw into their camps, leaving tens of thousands of people with zero protection.
South Sudan becomes the world's newest nation as the regime of Omar al-Bashir launches a new war against previously southern-aligned rebels in border provinces.
Since the Bashir regime seized power, people have looked at the country and seen spreading civil war and genocide unparalleled to anywhere else in the world, and it's been obvious who the responsible parties are for the majority of the crimes.
Yet to date, Bashir and his small clique of war criminals have managed to survive international sanctions, interventions, armed rebellions, and small protests against its rule.
It goes beyond what is happening internally in Sudan. This is a regime that has marched its trail of blood all the way around the world in its support of fugitives such as Osama bin Laden.
The killings committed by this government are not some sort of distant, ethnic, or religious conflict that has nothing to do with the rest of the world. On the contrary, the crimes committed by Bashir and his fellow war criminals have helped shape much of the world we know today, and not for the better.
Bashir's forces are being accused of slaughter, rape, and displacement in South Kordofan state.
Now the savagery is spreading to Sudan's Nuba Mountains, where more than 300,000 people are on the run.
Well, the satellite Sentinel, well, sort of what happened was I was in the middle of South Sudan, right on the border, in a place called Abyei. And it was a very violent time to be there, and it wasn't a particularly fun time, and we were trying to get out on a very bad road. And we were pulled over on the side of the road, and my friend John Prendergast and I were sitting there and kind of looking up at the sky in the middle of the night, which is not when you want to be traveling. And I said, how come you can Google Earth my house right now, and you can't Google Earth, you know, a disputed border? And so we just started with the idea that why not, you know, and so that's our objective, is to just shine a light on it.
Before we begin our journey, we sat down with Jonathan Hudson of the Satellite Sentinel Project and Enough Project to learn more about how the war in the Nuba Mountains started.
Abdelaziz Al-Hilu, he was the deputy governor, and he was trying to unseat in an election the sitting governor. He had been appointed, and his name was Harun. And Harun is an indicted war criminal. He was actually indicted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, including genocide in Darfur. And so it was the governor versus the deputy governor. And the election was moving forward. You know, in May, things began to unravel as the people felt that the election was stolen. The party offices of the SPLM political party were broken into, the voter rolls were taken, and that was used as a basis for death squads to go house to house systematically in the neighborhoods of Kadugli and start killing people who were believed to support this political party or who were believed to simply be Nuba people. So in some cases, people were killed not for anything that they said or did, but simply for breathing while being Nuba. The Satellite Sentinel Project had heard multiple media reports that were unconfirmed of mass graves being dug and filled. So we set out to locate and interview eyewitnesses who had seen the mass graves. One eyewitness reported seeing a mass grave dug and filled on June 8th. The eyewitness reported that the dead bodies, more than 100 of them, went into an initial 3 mass graves. He said that some of them were wrapped in white tarps or body bags, and others were simply not wrapped in anything. We would later find documentary evidence from the Sudanese Red Crescent Society that they had pre-positioned 400 white body bags in Kadugli before the mass killings began. They had also pre-positioned over 2,000 white tarps. They called it their corpse management team. There were white vehicles going around picking up stacks of bodies that were piled in the streets, just like, you know, an urban garbage collector might go and pick up the trash. And they reported that these bodies were being sort of ferried back and forth to the mass grave sites by these Sudanese Red Crescent Society workers. In some cases, eyewitnesses told us that bodies were thrown in the mass graves and were then doused with fuel and set on fire. 3 hours after we published the report, a draft United Nations report was leaked in which there was a 4th eyewitness. A woman worked for the UN, reported seeing a mass grave site south of the Tilo school, had seen a bulldozer, a tracked vehicle, actively burying bodies. And in the satellite imagery, you can actually see the tracks running up through the middle of these 3 apparent mass grave pits. Well, the UN dispatched military observers to go and investigate the site. And the Sudan Armed Forces, believe it or not, arrested the UN military observers, stripped them naked, subjected them to a mock execution, and said, if you ever come back to investigate this reported mass grave, we'll shoot you for real. We interviewed multiple eyewitnesses who said that between 7,000 and 11,000 internally displaced people sought shelter literally within the shadow of the UN compound in Kadugli. On a daily basis, eyewitnesses reported seeing Sudanese security forces enter the protective perimeter and abduct men, women, and children, civilians, and lead them away to be killed. Sudanese security forces came to the IDPs and told the thousands who remained, you have to leave, you cannot stay here any longer. So you either have to go home or go to one of the local schools, or we'll give you a ride to a local soccer stadium. What is known is that trucks pulled up and 20-ton lorries marked with the Sudanese Red Crescent Society emblems pulled up. Workers wearing aprons bearing the Sudanese Red Crescent Society logo ushered people into the waiting trucks. It's known that thousands of people were then trucked away from the protective shadow of the UN compound. They were never seen or heard from again. Perhaps the biggest value of the Satellite Sentinel Project is that we've been able to corroborate and validate the reports of the Nuba people in the Nuba Mountains who say they're being ethnically cleansed and targeted because of their political beliefs. When you ask them what do they want most, they want most for people to simply hear their story and respond.
Seeing evidence provided by the Satellite Sentinel Project and people like Jonathan is compelling and can be useful for preventing further violence and holding war criminals accountable. But seeing the crimes up close and personal, meeting the people who have survived, and asking them hard questions many would prefer not hearing the answers to is also needed and something we could provide. So in May of 2012, we boarded a plane destined for South Sudan. Our plan was to travel across some of the most rugged terrain in the world, cross the border of South Sudan into Sudan, and then pass through the front lines and go directly into the war zone to see firsthand evidence of the crimes being committed against the Nubian people. Juba is a city that is rapidly expanding and changing. Since independence was secured over a year ago, the people's nationalism is very strong. There are South Sudanese flags everywhere, and people talking about solving the country's corruption issues, and really just a general excitement about the opportunities that lie ahead for their country. But from just being in Juba, it becomes obvious very quickly that this is a country in a de facto state of war with its former masters in Khartoum. One of our friends we met there is Namat. After telling us about what she does and some of the issues refugees from the Nuba Mountains are facing, she asked us if we could come and capture their stories on camera. Namat then drove us across town to the new homes for some of these refugees who had just arrived only a few weeks earlier. And from the mouths of people who were witnessing atrocities in the Nuba Mountains, we heard story after story of hardship and death.
لولا انه في ظرف اضطراري وظرف الحرب والمعاناة الناس عاشته ما كنا كان خلينا اصلا جبال نوبة جينا للبلد تاني. وفعلا نحن جينا بعد معاناة مشي بالارجل ماشي بالبحر اخيرا عناية الالهية وصلتنا لجوبا. اكثر حاجة لما تعاني وصلي جاهلة. انا ما كفرت، انا بتكلم لماذا نزل. انا بقول لاوباما هو كرئيس لاعظم دولة في العالم لو عنده مقدر يوقف حرب ما بين الليل وبكره خليه يوقف. ده واحد. الحاجة العاجل لو يمكن يوقف الطائرات، ضرب الطائرات لأن الطائرات شوفوا مدارس ما قاعدين يقروا، الناس ما قاعدين يزرعوا، حتى من فكرات ما قاعدين يصلوا. لو يمكن ضرب الطائرات خليه كيف الآن. ورسالة دير حاجة دير يقول إن يا الناس جو من الجبال حسب بس اسمها طائرة جاي، طائرة في جوبا ما فهمتنا، لكن طائرة جاي ينزل مطار شاف قوم بيجي خشي ينتسر، لأن ده وضع عشان هنا حس حالي. الوطني ما قدر يسمح لمنظمة يشتغل. أنا ما أعرف السؤال بتاعتي أو الرسالة بتاعتي لأوباما. هو ما بيقدر يضغط مؤتمر وطني عشان يسمح للمنظمات يقدر يخفف المعاناة عن الشعب ده. زي ما سيسحق إنه وضع صعب جدا جدا، وكل مرة نهم يستقبل الحالات بتاعت الوفاة بتكر يعني بالذات. أنا ده أقول منطقة كواليب، خليه من مرات أنا ما أعرف عنها حاجة، لكن منطقة كواليب تجري لحد الشهر فات فقد ما يقارب 7 نفر وتبتت ولادة. هل أوباما كالرئيس لأعظم دولة في العالم ما بإمكانه يضغط المؤتمر الوطني عشان اسم المنظمة يشتغل عشان يساعد الناس؟ خلي عندكم قلوب رحيمة على اللاجئين من جبال النوبة وقولوا نايم. لو أنتم المجتمع الدولي حاول بقدر الإمكان وقف لنا حرب عشان نرجع بلدنا نعيش عزيزين ومكرمين.
As if stories such as these and the anger many Nubans feel isn't bad enough, the suffering of these people continued even in Juba. The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, had registered Nubian refugees so they would be eligible to receive food. Yet UNHCR was not showing up with food, making their registration cards useless. Instead, individuals like Namat and other South Sudanese were helping to feed and shelter these people.
Okay, I'm called Amin Osman, the last picture. I'm a doctor by profession. I'm Director General for Health at Nuba Mountains right now. I just come from there 2 weeks ago. Then most probably I will go back tomorrow because we have so many issues over there. Background of why the health situation got worse like that. And to me, I think it was a plan actually. It is not just abruptly. It was well planned by the system in Khartoum. So that's why immediately after the war, Bashir announced that he does not want to allow any NGO to access Blue Mountains because he knows very clearly that he's controlling everything in Khartoum. So nobody can be able to get in. So this one led immediately to the outbreak of measles, which now we are facing right now. So now we have outbreak of measles, in addition to the malnutrition, which is also affecting quite a number of children. Leave alone the injuries by the bombardment and long-range missiles, all this kind of thing. So at this point, 1 year, not being able to convince Khartoum or to take any measures to get in, we think international community has really helped regime in Khartoum to reach their goals. Because now, death of children by measles, this is what they were actually after, and this is what they have achieved now. They have achieved the goal of having children died of measles because UN could not access the area and give these essential services, which is really a right of any child in the world. And I'm expecting to have outbreak of tuberculosis. And I hope we will not have outbreak of polio and other killing diseases. But with this situation, if still international community could not get into the Nuba Mountains to help the situation, I'm sure we're going to have all these kind of outbreaks, and that will be the real goal of Bashir and his regime, which they have achieved through weakness of UN. As we know, we are not actually rebels. We have an issue, and maybe I can call Bashir is rebel, but not us actually, because he rebelled against the CPA. What is the definition of rebel? We have a CPA. We should go for election, all this kind of thing, but he rebelled against it. Then he start fighting. So I need also international community to understand these terminologies. They have to think of them very, 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 very clearly. Who's really the rebel? I know if they are waiting for Bashir to give them go ahead, it will never happen. Then the international community, their failure and their weakness actually, they helped him to achieve these goals. We don't tell them to stop the aerial bombardment. Aerial bombardment, let it continue. We don't mind because it's war. But not to provide food, not to provide medicine. So it's really a shame. But I'm just sending message to the communities. Okay, the communities they can really help, like church leaders, like other associations. I think if they could actually give some attention to the situation, I think that would be great. I think my message to Obama: we are fighting the terrorists. We are fighting the terrorists, and he's fighting the terrorists. UN has no capacity to arrest Bashir, and he's now a hero because he's very confident that nobody will reach him. So if actually Obama wants to fight terrorists, he should push accessibility of the humanitarian agencies to Nuba Mountains. Let him think of imposing no-flight zone for this bombardment of the civilians, because Khartoum is actually bombing the civilians. If he only does these two things, we will arrest Bashir in very short time. I hope he will understand this message very clearly. If he wants to fight terrorists, we will start fighting them from here, because actually we know the source is Khartoum. If he doesn't know, we should tell him that all these people who got training, they got training from Khartoum under this regime. Osama bin Laden and his people, they went out from Khartoum. So what is he thinking actually? So there are so many others who are still active, and Bashir is one of them.
Armed with this new information and a better understanding of the security situation, we boarded a plane north for the city of Bentiu. Once we landed, we could immediately tell we were closer to the border. South Sudanese troops were on every street, and for good reason. In March of 2012, the political issues between Sudan and South Sudan exploded into a wave of border violence. Since South Sudan became the world's newest country in July of 2011, serious issues including permanently determining where the border was, oil disputes, and water rights increased in severity to such a degree that in January of 2012, South Sudan turned the oil pumps off. But even before the oil shut off, Omar al-Bashir and his regime had been supporting militias in South Sudan and sending its warplanes across the border to bomb Southern Territory. For months, the South Sudanese called upon the international community to help stop Khartoum's actions, and for months the calls for help were ignored. By mid-April, with peace talks going nowhere and simmering discontent stretching across South Sudan, the government of South Sudan decided it was time to take matters into its own hands. South Sudanese troops and tanks soon rolled across the border into Heglig, the only remaining oil field in the north. While preparing to take Heglig back, the Sudanese government sent 2 MiG-29 bombers deep into South Sudan territory to destroy the bridge in Bentiu, the only bridge in the area that would allow South Sudan to reinforce its troops further north. They missed the bridge, and instead destroyed homes of those living nearby. Wow.
This one?
Uh-huh.
And that one?
And this one?
And that one? And that one? Even that one. All the things are burning one day.
One day?
Yeah. One day.
Wow.
One day. And it's killed 5 people.
5
people and
2 children?
Yeah.
So these people's homes were destroyed just because they were living here.
No,
they yeah.
Yeah. We went over to that one.
You want to explain what that is, Ryan?
So this is shrapnel. The Sudanese bomber planes will fly over this area right here, just right over there, and upon impact, pieces of metal, shards of glass shoot out of the bombs into people, into villages, and that's what this is. This is a, as you can see, a very torn piece of metal. On impact.
Do you know?
Two giant bombs. Yeah. And so this, when it hits the ground, goes outward.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that what killed these 4 people?
5.
5 people.
5 injured.
A few days later, as Sudanese troops launched an attack to retake Heglig, the bombers returned to Bentiu. But instead of aiming for the bridge, they dropped a bomb on the local market, terrorizing the people there.
This is one of the areas that has been targeted, hit by Khartoum aircraft during that time, and as you can see, it killed a man here, and it burned also a child someplace. So now he said that when he was selling his materials here, immediately during the time of bombardment, he was hit by the aircraft, and now he's still in the hospital.
It was probably when the locals began showing us the bombing sites I've been to is when the full weight of what we were trying to accomplish really hit me. Standing in the middle of a crowded market and seeing where a war crime had been recently committed puts things into perspective very, very quickly. Knowing that at any moment the same area could be bombed again immediately changes everything about the mission. Walking amongst these people who deal with this fear every day is almost unfathomable. Why should anyone have to be scared to go shop or work in the marketplace because of war crimes such as these? Although we wanted to stay and hear more from eyewitnesses, we had to keep moving if we were going to make it to the Nuba Mountains. Since we were in the market, we traveled from stall to stall and began purchasing supplies for our drive north the next day. We then found a hotel nearby to spend the night. This is home for the next few days. Woo! When we departed Bentiu, we drove right through one of the main reasons that South Sudan and Sudan came to the brink of war. In the world's poorest country, we drove through huge amounts of infrastructure for pumping oil. As we left the oil fields behind, we began to see signs that the further north we go, the more dangerous the situation becomes. Traveling down remote roads that are in horrible conditions, you come across beautiful wildlife and fertile fields that almost make it seem like you're in some sort of paradise. But along the way, we began running into groups of soldiers and UN peacekeepers. The further north we went, the larger the security presence felt. Then all of a sudden, the highway turns into a bush road and the soldiers just disappear. All of a sudden, it felt like we were in some sort of no man's land, and in many ways we were. We were now only a few miles short of the border and only 3 hours away from the Nuba Mountains. But before we crossed into a war zone, we had one more stop to make. Yida used to be a patch of soil with some trees. No one lived in this area at all. But when the war started, thousands of people began fleeing south and ended up here. When we arrived in Yida, we were instantly swarmed by this huge group of children. And that's when we realized that these are the real victims of this war. What began as a small number of Nubans has grown to be the home of over 65,000 people, with more coming every day. The path from the Nuba Mountains to Yida is one of the only remaining roads that refugees can escape on. Sudanese government forces have blocked other roads elsewhere across the border, making this one of the last open evacuation routes for refugees. Upon arriving at Yida, local leaders asked us to come to a council meeting that represents all of the different areas of the Nuba Mountains so that we could get a good idea of what specific issues their people are facing. So we sat down for a series of interviews with over 30 individuals that lasted for nearly 2 hours. And from their own mouths, we heard the real truth behind the horrible stories of what was happening right across the border.
من المجتمع الدولي أول حاجة وقف لنا الطيران. اثنين عمر بشير يقبضوا له المجرم أصل الحرب افترض يتم قبضه لأنه أصلا عمر بشير ما قصد أنه يعني النوبة يستقر نهائيا لأنه يعني الحاجة الآن الماشي ده تدخير إرقي للنوبة ككل لأنه الآن الشيء الماشي ده يعني ما حاجة عادي جدا وممكن مهما عملنا يعني السلام مع عمر بشير ما هيقبل ولو قبل يعني في يعني تحايلات وده يعني أنا أدي فرصة لباقي المكوك لو في إضافة لكن أنا إضافتي الكلام اللي قلته ده يعني أتمنى أنه يعني لو في تنفيذ يتنفذ فورا قبل يعني الزول ده تاني يستمر سنة تانية في الحكم لأنه لو استمر بيكون في كارثة كما شفتوا انتوا.
عشان انتوا تأكدوا الزول ده ما قاصد السلطة، قاصد الناس الأسود ينتهي منه. لكن لو في العالم مسؤولين للإنسان ما بيكون حاجات بيحصل زي ده. عشان كده المواطن ذنبه شنو في السلطة؟ المواطن انت لو قدرت امسك السلطة وامسك معاك المواطن لأنه المواطن ذاته هو لو قبضته ده سلطة. عمر بشير ولا مرة ولا الجنة ولا الشايب ولا الأجوز انقرض بس لو هو قاصد الحكومة المواطن جرى جينا هنا لسه جاري ورانا المواطن جرى.
وطبعا عمر بشير ده نحن عارفينه هو بيستعمر نوبة هو داير بس يمشي فوق عليهم وهم يمشي تحت عليه.
ايوه نعم عمر البشير ده والله ما ريحنا خالص بالذات احنا النسوان والاطفال ولا خلى مرة شابة ولا خلى مرة عجوزة ولا خلى طفل ولا خلى لنا مال ولا خلى لنا اي حاجة في جبال النوبة عامة. بلد كله تلقى المنطقة كلها يستعملوها.
Sometimes whenever they enter the village, their target is just to do this. So all village. Someone is saying they took 470 women. They took them.
Where did they take them?
Yeah.
Where did they take
شالهم ودهم وين؟
ودهم كادوغل بيستعملوا فوق الجيش بتاعهم.
They took them to Kadugli, their headquarters, and just become concubines, or they just use them over there.
ما مستغلين السلطة في الحتة دي.
Yeah,
مستغلين النوبة بس. بشير ده حتى لو بيجي قدامي أنا بقول له يا عمر كلامك ده عيب. أنت بتعمل أنصرة. بتعمل لنا إحنا مشاكل، إحنا نوبة عشان إحنا سود. وذلك أنت بتمسك ناس وتدخلي ناس.
هم لهسه إنه أي زول يعني بيكون قاعد منشغل يعني بالصوت بتاعت الدانات بتاع الانتونوف والصوت بتاعت الشهاب والصوت بتاع الدانات. والله هي تصوري إذا كان العمر البشير ده مشى يبقى إحنا كل الناس المهمشين بيلقوا قصدهم في السلطة والثروة والثقافة والحاجات دي كله. إن شاء الله إحنا ذاتنا بنلقى نصيبنا داخل السودان الموجود إذا كان هو عمر بشير ده فات. والجانب الثاني هو عمر بشير ما دار الثقافة بتاعت النوبة أو دارفور أو النيل الأزرق، ما دار الثقافة بتاعتهم هي تكون هي موجودة. هم عاوزين ثقافة واحدة بس اللي هو الثقافة العربية.
والآن المواطنين يعني حتى الآن عندنا قريب 40 ولا كم 40,000 كلاجئين موجودين في إيدا هنا، لكن الأغلبية برضو الآن موجودين في الجبال، لكن بيعانوا من مشكلة المعيشة. ونحن نتمنى يعني اخواننا المجتمع الدولي لابد يعني نطالب لابد الطيارات زي ما الطيارات بتجينا هنا لابد تمشي الجبال تنقذ باقي الناس دي. يعني الناس الان بياكلوا شجر والناس يعني شغل بياكلوا ما في. نتمنى لازم اغاثه توصل الجبال للباقي شنو المواطنين الموجودين هناك. نقول زي ما تم يا جماعه القبض، يعني كان الرئيس الليبي تم القبض له، الرئيس العراقي تم القبض له، ليه ما يتم القبض له لعمر بشير؟ هو في النهايه بشر برضه. ونتمنى ان شاء الله رسالتنا دي توصل ويعملوا بها عشان ان شاء الله الشعب ده يرتاح. وبارك الله فيكم.
So we stuck Ryan in the back because we don't like him that much. But this is
my home for the next 3 or 4 hours.
For the next 3 to 4 hours. What he doesn't know is we're gonna leave him back here for the rest of the trip.
You know, I'm cool with it. There's food here. There's beds. I'm gonna be able to find Wi-Fi. But now we're on our way to the Nuba Mountains.
Yep. As we approached the last few miles leading up to the border, we began coming across refugees who had been walking for days hoping they would make it to Yida. Many looked like they were entering the beginning stages of starvation, while others looked like they had not slept for days. We soon came to the last South Sudanese checkpoint, and moments later, we entered a no man's land in Sudan. As we drove further north, it was like entering another world. We started to drive past abandoned homes and villages on a landscape that changed from a lush green environment to dry grasslands and desert within only a few minutes. So we drive through this no man's land for about 2 hours, not in SPLM North rebel territory or Sudanese government areas, knowing that at any minute, if we run into members of the Sudan Armed Forces, this whole mission's over, and probably our lives are over as well. Eventually, we arrive at the town of Dar, which is the closest community in rebel-held territory to the border. And if there was any doubts we were not in a war zone, they were all about to be erased right here.
Nuba Mountains, this is our first stop. Already evidence of fighting. We have already seen that there's been a tank destroyed here as recently as February, and trenches along this area. Shells are everywhere. And this is just right here as close as the border. So we anticipate seeing more evidence of warfare as we move deeper into the Nuba Mountains.
The soldiers told us that although they had fought off government forces several times, that we were still in range of Bashir's artillery, and that the road leading north further into the mountains had actually been shelled earlier that morning. We were given permission to move forwards, but were warned it was at our own risk. And to help navigate upcoming checkpoints, the local commander placed an armed escort in our vehicle. As we left Dar behind, the soldier told us that the road we were on had also been shelled the day before, and that Sudanese government forces still had a heavy presence in the area.
Yeah, the army right now is in Tabanya, where we are heading to.
They are in Tabanya?
Yeah, they are in Tabanya.
Sudanese army?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, Tabanya is a district. Then.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Tabanya is.
I was like, turn around.
Maybe you misunderstood our original desire.
Our escort took us to the next SPLM North Rebel Command Post. With government forces within a few kilometers of our location, we needed to know the limits of where we could go without putting ourselves into further danger. Both the SPLM North and Commissioner then asked us to travel to the nearby town of Baram so we could document an aerial bombing that had happened 20 hours earlier. As we walked along the way, we also visited sites where government warplanes had struck over the past several weeks. But even as we walked towards Baram past previous bombing sites, we were struck by just the absolute beauty of the landscape. Clean mountain air because there's no industry nearby, and just this overwhelming sense of tranquility as we walked past these perfectly geometric earthen housing rising up from the ground. And then the beauty just disappeared. In any war, the civilian population is always the bearer of the greatest burden. Doesn't matter where in the world, who is involved, so forth and so on. But standing in Baram, knowing that the closest rebel military target is miles down the road, there just isn't an excuse for bombs hitting so many homes. It'd be absolutely ludicrous to think that since this war started, so many communities have been accidentally hit by low-altitude bombings to the point of hundreds of thousands needing to flee. Baram was targeted on purpose because it is assumed to support the SPLM North just because of where they are located. Bashir and his fellow war criminals, they don't know the political affiliations of these people, or even if they have political affiliations. Instead, these people are being targeted based on their geographic location and ethnicity, as these two qualifiers, if you will, put them at risk due to the decisions being made in Khartoum. While we were in Baram, we interviewed a woman we met who had witnessed the bombing. She asked her name not be used for safety reasons, but she did want to tell us about what these bombings do to the people living in the Nuba Mountains.
Now we are unable to sleep. We are terrorized. We are living in fear. We cannot sleep by night because we do not guarantee whether the Antonov would come or not.
It is in no way surprising that this woman, speaking from her own personal experience, makes this point about the dark cloud of terror that has cast a shadow over this area of Sudan. These crimes are committed in cold blood. These bombings and massacres are the direct result of a design. There was preparation that went into these attacks against innocent people.
الناس احنا طبعا عالجنا كتير لأن
we have وهسه قبل شوية حرقنا 5 نفر. We have treated a lot since بيكون بالمئات.
هاي بأعلى المئات كمان.
أعلى من المئات. almost 1,000 or more people whom we treated in this small hospital.
This is not just a war that is happening. Campaigns of targeted mass violence are not a reaction to something. Genocides don't just happen. It's true that there's always a trigger point for the killings to begin. We saw that in Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur, and even in the Holocaust. But when you take a step back and you look at this purposeful campaign of aerial bombings against civilians, forced denial of humanitarian aid, shelling of refugee evacuation routes, you see the product of a design, a calculation to annihilate an entire group of people. You see the trigger point that happened in Kadugli. You see the terror and the anger and the fear. Ultimately, these actions point to evidence of an attempted genocide. There is clearly a defined group of people that is being targeted for annihilation. There are premeditated actions being taken here. During this entire experience, we heard story after story that had a similar theme running through it. These people, who were happy to live their lives peacefully, woke up one day to government jets and bombers flying overhead, bombs hitting homes, schools, and clinics, and people not even having time to pack up their belongings before they had to flee. In communities where there was no SPLM North presence, when the militias and government forces arrived, they would shoot the men and young boys, or sometimes simply burn them alive. The women and girls were gang raped, girls as young as 13. Those that were not killed afterwards were taken to what people simply called rape camps, run by government soldiers. The same soldiers and militiamen who are also slitting the throats of defenseless people, burning entire villages to the ground. In some cases, we were told stories by people who managed to escape that attack helicopters hunted those who fled like they were animals. We know this because despite all of this chaos and butchering going on, people somehow managed to escape, while others found places to hide, behind trees or amongst boulders, even sometimes higher up in the mountains looking down, and watched the crimes be committed. They watched their lives be completely destroyed. Our mission is to change the way ordinary people think and act when it comes to protecting populations from mass atrocity crimes. Since world leaders are not willing to fulfill their responsibilities in ending this war, we are going to have to begin that process by doing it ourselves and in partnership with our friends on the ground. Now is the time to act, and there are 2 things you can do to help end the Nuba genocide. The world needs to know about this crisis. On November 1st, 2012, this documentary will be posted online for the entire world to see. We need you to share across the front lines with your friends online and spread the word about this crisis. Go to our website at obsilence.org and download the free online action kit. The action kit tells you about our efforts to end this war and protect the people of the Nuba Mountains. More importantly, the action kit is your guide to joining these efforts. The online action kit focuses on our 3-pronged approach for supporting you in action. The international community has a responsibility to protect every human being in the world from crimes just like the ones being committed in Sudan. World leaders are obviously not living up to that responsibility. You can sign our petition to the next President of the United States. We are requesting that they publicly declare how they will include true protection of civilians and justice for perpetrators in a new Sudan foreign policy that is direly needed. The online action kit puts the power of this film in your hands. It includes information on how to host your own small screening at home for friends and family. Lastly, the online action kit is your guide to joining efforts that are directly assisting the victims on the ground. The Sudanese trapped behind the front lines of this war cannot continue waiting for world governments and leaders to fulfill their responsibilities in delivering urgently needed humanitarian aid that Bashir is blocking. We are partnering with globally recognized genocide scholars, leading fundraisers and advocates for Sudan, and local NGOs on the ground, and we're purchasing food and medical supplies that are reaching victims wherever they are found.
Some people really think that they can't make a huge impact. Maybe they don't have a big network, or they have never fundraised or committed to some sort of social action before. But it's really amazing what happens when ordinary people, using very simple tools, move past that barrier and begin raising small amounts of money or grow their voice to be louder. Over time, more and more people start doing that, and it becomes a tidal wave of change that can't be stopped. So what if you can't raise thousands of dollars? If you can raise $100 alongside hundreds, thousands of other people, then it comes out with the same result.
The international community may not be willing to assist those trapped in the war zone. We are. The Action Kit walks you through the process of creating your very own fundraising page so you can raise investments for these supplies. Our actions can have an impact in breaking this humanitarian blockade and ending the war. Since the Holocaust, humanity has watched helplessly as political leaders turned against their own people and committed some of the worst crimes in our world. When we saw the darkest events of human history transpiring, we can honestly say that we wanted to do something to help, but we didn't know how to do it. The problem seems so big, and the people needing protection so far away. But now, together, we can begin changing that. In Sudan, people who once seemed so far away are now our friends. Thanks to technology, we can now see them and talk to them every day. We hear each other's voices like never before. We see their joys and sorrows like never before. And when we see them suffering so that a small clique of war criminals can remain in power, we see that there are ways we can help our friends, and that when more of us start helping, the status quo starts to change. It has the power to change how we as individuals impact our world. Our friends are asking for our help, and if we can answer that call, when the next generation looks back in human history, they will see that after decades of humanity not knowing how to assist those in their darkest hour, we stood arm in arm with our friends when they entered that time. And when we look back with our friends years from now, we can say that together, we not only saved lives and protected our humanity, but we also ended a war that many thought could not be stopped.